Greetings and happy Tuesday, school directors, friends, and colleagues from the public education space. It is Tuesday, September 10th at noon. I'm getting us started right on time because we have a packed agenda and are relying on content from several guest speakers and want to honor their time. So thanks so much for being here. This is the third in a series of 5 pre-learning for the 2024 WSSDA General Assembly. Just a few logistical points. If you could please mute your microphone as you join so that we can hear folks who are meant to be talking, that would be optimal. If you could please use the chat to introduce yourself, we'd love to know who's in the Zoom room. So go ahead and just let us know what district you're from, and if you are your board's voting delegate, or if you're a school district, school board member here just to listen and learn. Both are great. Thanks for being here either way. If your board does not yet have a voting delegate, please, please, please have someone register as soon as possible. And if you have any trouble going through that registration process, please let me know. I'm happy to walk you through it. We are recording today's webinar. I understand several folks have actually watched, which just thrills me that you're watching our recorded webinars. Woo! From last week, we covered association operations, capital and school facility, and governance, position proposal topics. As you know, we will be grappling with a myriad of issues during General Assembly this year. And the way we've organized this pre-learning series is by category. So your positions are organized in various categories. One of your biggest categories is funding and allocations, and certainly is one of the most attended to, or may I say important, based on how you prioritize your positions following General Assembly in preparation for the legislative session ahead. Again, if you wouldn't mind muting your microphone, would sure appreciate it, as to not be a distraction while we've got some presenters. And you can see we've got Mike Hoover here talking about state revenue forecast, Daniel Lunghofer from the WSSDA team on MSOC. I've asked Roz Thompson from our partner organization, the Principals Association, to speak to the implications of unfunded and underfunded mandates. I also had a last minute ask for some explanation around what impact aid and tarot tax is, as that was one of those amendment language elements that came through the amendment window in early August. And then I will do some closing and reminders as time allows. If you have questions for any of the speakers as we go, please type it in the chat. And I will curate those questions and ask our presenters at the conclusion of their section of time. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pop up just a little orientation to something you may be curious about. You have this year on the agenda for the General Assembly a consent agenda item. We haven't had one of those for a while as it relates to an actual adopted position. So I wanted to just walk you through it because it is related to funding and allocations. So you will see the first proposal on the voting order for this year's General Assembly is a consent agenda item on funding related positions. Moses Lake School District brought this forward to the Legislative Committee for consideration. The Leg Committee provided a due pass recommendation. Just a reminder that when you see those recommendations at the top of every position proposal, those are recommendations based on either the Leg Committee, Resolutions Committee, or WSSDA Board's recommendations. They are just recommendations. Your vote is on the position proposal in front of you during General Assembly. So if you give a due pass, if you vote pro, that's in support of the proposal as written. If you vote con, it is against the proposal as written. So the consent agenda item lists 40 plus existing member adopted positions that relate to school funding issues. So there's quite a myriad here: artificial intelligence technology, full funding of basic ed, levy authority, MSOC funding, regulations governing K-12. You refer to funding related issues in many of your adopted positions. As such, sometimes it's confusing when advocating about what type of funding we're asking for. So this consent agenda item proposes that there be consistent language for these these existing positions that would describe the type of funding you're looking for as ample, full, and sustainable. So were you to adopt this consent agenda, the words amply, fully, and sustainably, or a version of them so that it's appropriate in the verb text based on how the position is currently written, would be added to this list of position proposals in front of you. I will say, as your director of advocacy, the benefit of that is that it creates some streamlining, some shared understanding of what type of funding we're asking for. And actually is a really great way to start General Assembly talking about several of your member adopted priority positions and identifying alignment for what we're hoping to achieve with the legislature. So if you have questions about that specifically, I'll be happy to field them later. But in the interest of time, I actually want to pass the microphone off to my colleague and friend, Mike Hoover, who is our consultant, but also has become a revenue forecast expert in recent days. And so, or maybe long-term, long-standing, but he's going to talk a little bit about it with us today.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I wouldn't probably use the word expert, but let's see how this goes. You know, you never know. You never know. I've certainly been doing it a long time. As the joke goes, the problem with predicting the future is that it hasn't happened yet. So we've got to be everything I say here kind of taken with a grain of salt, but everything I'm saying here is mostly not what I'm saying. It's what other people are saying, smart people, people that know stuff. And if you didn't know, Washington State has an economic forecast council, and they are constantly doing work to basically, just like the name suggests, look at our economy statewide, nationally too, but statewide, and see what they think is going to happen in the coming year. And they do this 4 times a year because things happen throughout the year, and they need to take account of those variables. And so they just did one. This one is, I think, the June one. And they are about to do one in September. We are just a little early before they do their most recent one, or do an update. So my most recent one, I should say, is actually from June. Could things change? Absolutely. Will they change? Probably. Will they change dramatically? Probably not, but you never know. And this is a presentation I tentatively titled "A Gripping Tale Told in 4 Charts." I only have 4 slides. You can be the judge of whether there is, in fact, a gripping tale, but I do promise delivery on the 4 charts. And the first one is this one that I hope you can all see on the screen right now. And this is what the Economic Forecast Council thinks our revenue, the state revenue, is going to look like. And my little tagline under here is, how can there be more money, but somehow less money too? Because you're all reasonable, smart adults, and you can look at this and say, how can the state possibly be in trouble, for example, in 25-27 biennium, if they're actually about to get $4 billion more than they were getting in 23-25? And the answer is they're not exactly in trouble. I wouldn't be in trouble if I got 4 billion extra, but they're in trouble in the sense that it is less than they expected to get. And that means it is less than the legislature budgeted. And if you go back and look at the budgets, you don't need to do it now or ever really, but if you do it, you'll see that although the legislature budgets in 2-year cycles, they also will do an outlook, a carry forward amount. They will tend to have a 25, 27 outlook of what they expect things might look like for many categories. And a lot of things, as you know from your own budgets, they kind of carry forward. You have to do them. You do them more or less at the current rate. And so you budget for them accordingly, and you figure that out, or at least you're supposed to figure that out before you do any additions. And so if you look at the chart here, the thing that should probably cause us the most pause, and I'm sure it's causing the legislature pause, is they're going to have, if the Economic Forecast Council is correct, they're going to have 286 million less for the current budget that ends, basically in June of next year. They're going to have 286 million less than they thought they were going to have. They're going to have to adjust and figure that out. Now, that is not a huge amount. It's a huge amount. I'm not making light of the amount. 286 million is a lot of money. but as a proportion of the total budget, it's not all that much. But it's still something they have to absorb and figure out in this next coming year when they do supplemental budgets. And they also need to figure out when they do budgeting for next year, how they're going to adjust the next 2-year budget downward, if at all, because they're getting a little less money than they thought they were going to get. And this is all over and above or independent from caseload forecast, which we're going to get to in a minute too. And caseload forecast is basically not this is how much we're bringing in. That's that forecast. Caseload forecast is who do we think is going to show up for services? You already deal with this regularly because you're dealing with who do we think is going to show up in September? I guess theoretically it's not theoretical anymore because they showed up. It's September. So, but for the legislature, we're always looking forward and saying, what do we think our caseload is going to be? And we'll get to that in another slide. But you can see this is not terrible. This is not catastrophic at all, but it definitely is a downward adjustment. And this should inform our asks and in our community for, or at least how we think our asks for money will be received by the legislature, because we will probably want additional money. That's perfectly reasonable. It is paramount duty of the state, for example, but we can expect some pushback from them saying, well, we're already having to basically absorb another 300 million that we didn't think we'd have to absorb. We're going to have to cut 300 million from somewhere, and here you come wanting more money. I have answers to that, one of which is you haven't really had to cut anything. This is mostly just going forward money, but I get your point. And still, they are still supposed to meet their paramount duty and then figure the rest of this out, is my very general answer to it. But I wanted to show it to you because this is what the legislature will be wrestling with. Can we please go to the next slide? These go a little out of order. This is the capital gains tax slide. It's going to be on the ballot this year. I'm trying to be very careful. Please do not take anything I'm saying as being for or against any ballot measure. I am not trying to do that. I'm just trying, it's hard to talk about this issue without talking about the ballot measure. The legislature did a capital gains tax several years back, and they are getting a little less money this year than they thought they were going to get. If you remember, or if you didn't know, I'm about to tell you, this could hit us especially hard because the capital gains tax has a formula that is dedicating that to us, to the schools. We're supposed to get a certain amount of the distribution from that. And if they're having 324 million less than they expected, I am concerned that they will make adjustments to us. Now, they don't have to make these adjustments. They could decide to take it from somewhere else, or they could figure out how the totality of all of this works. But I suspect the legislature is a little surprised that they are getting less than they expected to get. That is because on this kind of a tax, while you can certainly impose a rate, you can't make people sell or transfer assets. So I don't know if it's the economy in general. I don't know if people are taking account of the new capital gains tax and not making sales and transfers. I really don't know what it is. I don't know if anybody completely knows what it is. But whatever the case is, there are fewer transactions happening upon which to levy the capital gains tax. And so far, that collection rate is down 324 million for the biennium from what they thought. Could it turn around? It certainly could. We'll have to see how it goes. So far, it's generated about 1.2 billion for the first 2-year budget cycle, which is a lot, but they had thought they were going to get 1.5 billion, so they're going to have to make an adjustment on that. And of course, the reason for bringing the ballot measure up is if there is a ballot measure 2109 that would repeal this entirely. If that happens, then they could, assuming that happens, assuming that that's upheld, et cetera, I have no way of knowing if that's going to happen. But if it did, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that that would blow another hole in their expectation of revenue. So these are all kind of on the horizon. We will know. If you didn't know, there's an election in November. I didn't know till I looked it up today. But there's going to be an election in November. And in addition to all the candidates, these ballot measures will be on it. They'll be decided, and they will have an impact one way or another on the budget. Next slide, please. This is the caseload forecast, simplified. If you go look at it online, and you're welcome to do so, you can see each of these categories with numbers, et cetera, et cetera. I was trying to make it fit all in one slide, so I just made two sides, one showing where caseloads are down and one showing where caseloads are expected to increase. And the only ones that are down are charter school enrollment and the college-bound scholarship and the Department of Corrections adults. Those are basically people in incarceration. Those two are down or slightly down. Everything else, and when I say everything else, I mean everything else. Everything else is going up. The demand for services is going up. I mention this because we need to realize what we are sort of, I hate to use the word competing for, but what are the other groups that are going to be making asks or demands upon the state? Because we have a paramount duty, no doubt about that, but also you can't just, you have to fund your jails, you have to fund your courts, you have to fund your long-term care, your medical assistance, all that kind of stuff. So all of these things being up will put additional pressure on the budget. And you know, you can expect that this will continue not just this year, but probably into 25, 27. And as I'll get to in another slide, our population is going up and people need services. The good news of population going up is that they tend to bring more tax revenue in. The bad news of population going up is they tend to need more services, whether that's roads, whether that's schools, whatever it is. So it's kind of a mixed bag when people move into the state or make demands for services from any other kind of reason. But this is how it's looking. The legislature is facing this. They're facing a slight loss in revenue, and they're facing an increased demand on what they need to meet for their caseloads. Next slide, please. This is the Climate Commitment Act, and you're probably sitting there going, Mike, I'm totally in favor of fixing and helping the climate, but how does that impact us? Well, it doesn't, it doesn't. This is another amount of money that was booked by the state, but brought in about $2 billion in 2023 by the time 2023 hit. That's great. It is another thing that is on the books, on the ballot, I should say, for November. If this were to get repealed, again, I'm not advocating for the ballot measure. I'm just saying that if the excuse me, if the Climate Commitment Act were repealed, that would be revenue that would be lost to the state. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's not even just the revenue that's lost. If you were to ever look at this area of law, it is rather complicated the way it is all drafted. And so they would have to go back and revise quite a bit of other laws to make everything balance out and figure out how they would make, they'd have to make quite a number of changes to the regular RCWs over and above the financial adjustment. So that would have to be reckoned with as well. Okay, the next slide, please. This is the final slide.
I think that was the last one.
Was that the last one?
That's what I have.
Oh, okay. On mine, I have it split up. Okay, my apologies. I remember I consolidated this. I did this so I could see it better, so it was bigger on my screen. The we're missing on the Climate Commitment Act, I have two things that aren't on your slide. I don't know why that, there they are. There we are, Climate Commitment Act. I have two bonus charts for you for whatever they're worth. In 2019 and 2020 through 2024, our inflation rate nationally has been about 4.76. That's percent. That's driving costs upwards, as you can probably guess. Our state has actually done a little better than that because averages are just that. They're averages. Nobody's probably really hitting that, but on average, the state has been about 4%, whereas the nation has been closer to 5%. So we're doing better than the nation, but it's still a pressure on everything. As you already know, everything's costing a little more to provide services. And our population has grown in about 15 years by 1.3 million. That's a lot of people. If you were wondering how much we've grown by, it's almost 22%. I would throw that in because it helps put some of the other things in perspective. And I saw a question in the chat about how can charter schools be going up and down. The answer is they can't. I think I have a typo in there, and I'll have to see which direction it was.
Let me pull it up and see here.
I don't know from this because this will be my chart. I'd have to go to the caseload forecast.
Got it. So it's one or the other, but it's not both.
It probably isn't both. I either dropped a word or when I was cut and pasting, I messed it up is probably what happened. I can look, but I don't know that I can look in time for, I'll look and put it in the chat.
Nice. Great.
So that I'm not taking other people's time.
We could just say that was an Easter egg to make sure people.
That's right. To make sure you're paying attention. Exactly.
Indeed.
Yes.
And I love that
Although
you
I will have to say, in the world of legislative budgeting, it's possible to be up and down.
that's right.
I wouldn't rule out their ability to get there.
I also love that you referred on one of your charts, or one of your slide to bonus charts. I think there's only one person who would consider additional charts a bonus, and that's Daniel Lunghofer, who will be speaking next on MSOC. But before we get to him, I guess I'd just throw one question to you, Mike. Um, Given sort of that big picture, which I think is important for our members to be aware of as they think about the numerous budget related items that they will want to be advocating for in General Assembly and beyond. Um, I mean, is there hope for us in there from your perspective? And what does it mean for our advocacy that there's ups and downs and moving money? Does that change how we advocate? And if
It,
so, what way?
I, I think it, the answer is there's hope. There is, yes. Because if you've been around the legislature for a while, and I assume most of you have been, I have been there when they have a great revenue forecast and they still tell me there's no money. So they always kind of say there's not any money, right? And these are not dramatic drops. These are not dramatic drops. If both of the initiatives were to pass, that could be more dramatic. But as things stand now, these are not dramatic. These are things they can accommodate various ways. And I think that we are looking at a backlog of neglect in a number of areas. And I think we make progress by pointing that out and saying, your shortfall. I mean, it's not to be flippant, but my one of my responses is, I wish I had your shortfall. My shortfall percentage wise is a lot greater for the schools. We have a shortfall in a whole bunch of fields, and that's what I'm here to talk about. I think that's the way I would kind of frame it. They push back no matter what. I'm being fair to them. They have a tough job. They have to fund all of these things, and they're having to do it with a little less money. But that's the job they chose. They can figure it out. If they're not going to share with us when times are going great, then I don't know why we would have to take a disproportionate share when times are going less great. But this can all be absorbed and figured out, and it will be a little more challenging. But yes, we will. I don't think it changes our behavior enormously. I don't think it does. Um,
Great.
I don't know if I helped much. We can that could be a whole nother unit on how we
For
do it.
sure. No, I just thought I really appreciate you giving some context as we dig into some of the more specific policy areas that I know our members will be attending to. So thanks for setting the table there. If you don't mind, I'm gonna let Daniel Longhofer take the screen now and share a little bit about material supplies and operating cost, fondly referred to as MSOC or men's socks during the legislative session. And you already have some existing member adopted positions on MSOC, but this year at General Assembly, there are some position proposals that would elevate the idea of MSOC or the issue of MSOC even greater into your legislative platform potentially, should you decide you want to prioritize it. Also, just giving context that there are several education organizations led by the Washington Association of School Administrators, WASA, on what they are calling the Big Three. You've probably heard about the Big Three, which are the three areas that they are advocating for as priorities already moving into the 2025 legislative session. And MSOC is one of those three. So it remains to be seen if that will be a priority of WASDA membership. We'll have to wait and see for the prioritization process. But given what I've heard from a lot of you, it certainly is something that you want to talk about, learn about, and find out how to increase dollars for. So with that, Daniel, do you mind taking it from here and
Not a problem. Let me.
sharing your screen?
Okay, so can everybody see my screen?
Yep, sure can.
All right. Um, so, hi, my name is Daniel Lunghofer. I'm WSSDA's accounting analyst. I've also been a business officer in the past, and I've worked at OSPI for many years, so I've been around. So I'm going to try and give you kind of this high-level overview of what MSOCs are. There we go. So what are they? So when we talk about it, it's material, supplies, and operating costs, as the title indicated. Previously, they were called non-employee related costs, or NERCs. So basically, it's anything it's costs that go for things rather than people, with a big but. That but is anytime you've got contracted staff, like if you don't have a school psychologist on staff and you have to contract with your ESD. Some districts will consider that a NERC, not a NERC, an MSOC, because it's a purchase services. A couple of districts out there, I'm sure, say no, we don't consider that MSOC because it's a personnel staff. But generally, it's services, it's supplies, it's things that you buy. And MSOCs are considered to be a part of the program of basic education. So how are they determined? It's allocated on a per student FTE basis in four main categories. You have basic education students, so every student generates a MSOC dollar amount. High school students generate an additional MSOC amount, so that's anyone grades 9 through 12. Career and technical education programs generate MSOCs for students in those programs, and that's both middle school for grades 7 and 8 and high school in grades 9 through 12. Skill Center programs also generate, and the funding rates are set in the budget. So the legislature determines how much you're going to get. How much you spend is based on these district, but the legislature tells you how much you're going to get. So what exactly is funded? So in basic education funding for MSOCs, there are 8 main categories, and the total for the 24-25 school year is $1,533.02 for every basic education student. And that's broken down into technology, utilities and insurance, curriculum and textbooks, other supplies, library materials, instructional professional development, facilities maintenance, and security and central office administration. Now, the funding for these categories in general terms, um, they're just saying, okay, we're going to give you $182.37 per student for technology. That does not mean you have to spend $182.37 on technology for each student. It's just what they're allocating. There's been a slight change to that, but generally speaking, MSOCs are just a funding allocation model. They're not a spending model. High school students generate additional MSOC in 5 categories: additional money for technology, curriculum and textbooks, other supplies, library materials, and instructional professional development. Your CTE programs generate $1,757.39 per FTE student, and it's allocated as a dollar amount, a flat dollar amount in total. It's not broken down into the 8 categories um, like the basic ed is. Um, and skill centers also get that flat dollar amount. So anyone doing the quick math, those skill center students are generating about $225-ish more per student on MSOCs than the basic education counterparts. Okay. So another part is any district that receives small school or remote necessary funding also receive an additional MSOC allocation. But this one is not based on student enrollment. This is uh, a dollar amount of $13,729.20. I sent Marissa the wrong number, so I'll send her the updated slides so she can send out the mailing. But it's done per additional certificate instructional staff unit that is funded on the small school and remote necessary allocations. So if your district receives one extra certificate instructional staff, then you're getting that $13,000 additional, and it is prorated based on the number of staff. And the kind of the idea is with the small school and remote necessary funding, it's recognizing, okay, you need a minimum level of staffing to be able to staff your schools. And this is also saying, well, then we also need an additional dollar amount of stuff to fund the schools as well. So annual changes, MSOC allocations are generally increased by inflations. The general basket of funded items has not changed since the McCleary solution and fix. Um, I will say this, that originally it was broken into 7 categories, but they split up one a few years ago and made it 8. I think it was the library and other materials was combined. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was no change to the dollar amount. Some of the recent changes, though, so when I said generally, these are some of the changes. The 22-23 budget added $25 to basic education technology line item. So all the others went up by inflation, then they added $25 to technology. Now, this was done in the budget. And one thing about a budgetary increase, so anything that they're funding in the budget, is that it is not written into statute. Budgets cannot change laws. So it was something that the legislature could have done in the future, said, okay, we need to cut back money. We're going to cut back that additional $25. In the 2024 session, in gross substitute House Bill 2494 codified that increase to the technology line item. So now it is considered a part of basic education, which means that the legislature cannot cut it in future years because now it's in law, it's basic education, this is how much they're going to do. And then they added some dollar amounts to the 3 line items there: utilities and insurance, professional development, and security and central office. And 2494 also added the language that the increased allocation amount of $20 per pupil is intended to address the growing costs of those categories and may not be expended for any other purpose. So in other words, those $21, the $14 in let me go back that slide. That $14 in utilities and insurance can only be spent in utilities and insurance. But I virtually guarantee every district out there is going to be spending a lot more this year than the extra $14 per student on utilities and insurance. So when we talk about MSOCs and we look at the funding gap, so using school year 22-23 data, and the reason I'm using that is that's the last school year for which statewide data is readily available. Districts, we just finished the 23-24 school year. Districts don't have to submit their financial information. It doesn't have to be accepted by the state until mid-November, and it's usually early to mid-December before the numbers become publicly available. So it'll be a while before we get that. But so in 22-23, statewide allocation was $1,388,000,000 rounded. Districts spent, I just realized I got too many numbers there, $1,744,000,000. So there was a shortfall of $356 million, or about 20%. And I put a star there because I used a kind of broad definition of MSOCs in this case. I basically took in the accounting world, I took basic education and district-wide support programs and activities 5, 7, 8, and 9, which is supplies, services, travel, and capital outlay. And then I excluded extracurricular because for some reason we have that recorded in basic education costs. CTE programs combined actually had an excess with a star of $14 million. And I put that star there because current school accounting does not fully allow for tracking some of these costs for tracking some MSOC costs to CTE programs. For example, utilities and insurance, in most cases, unless you have a separate meter for your CTE classrooms, your district isn't going to know how much power, your CTE classrooms are drawing compared to, the rest of the building. So you can't allocate those costs to the CTE program. So that's why there's an asterisk there, is that we may not be capturing the full cost just because current accounting guidelines don't let us do it. Skill centers had a shortfall of about $10 million. And school centers are maybe a little easier to track the costs of because they're generally in a separate building for some of these options. But that's just a shortfall of the accounting system. So funding gap, as part of your budget process, you either have to disclose the projected shortfall in MSOC funding versus budget expenditures, or disclose how any MSOC funding not used for MSOCs will improve student achievements. Um, and this can be done as part of the budget adoption resolution. It can be just part of the budget presentation, but there just has to be some disclosure of either the shortfall or how we're going to use this money to improve student achievement. A couple other items: special education programs receive a flat dollar allocation. So unlike basic ed and career and technical education, which receive salaries, benefits, and MSOCs, special ed is a flat dollar amount. It's X dollars per student, here you go. So there's no easy way to split out what the cost of the funding is for MSOC costs. And then LAP, highly capable and transitional bilingual programs, currently do not receive MSOC allocations. Those are funded solely on extra staff units, and combined, those programs spent $44 million in 22-23. And I included all these are considered within the realm of basic education as is defined by the state. So that's why I included these other programs. So looking at the funding gap summary, so basic education, 356 million. High school CTE is that excess of 14. Now you add it all up and you've got a total funding gap shortfall of about $400 million statewide. So of the, however many, of the 2+ billion, the nearly one, sorry, of the nearly probably 1.8 billion spent on MSOCs, $400,000 is unfunded, meaning it's having to come from local revenues. I think that was my last slide. So I will stop share. Marissa, do we have any questions in the chat?
We do, some of which may require you to do a little digging, but maybe not. So when you are referring to small school in your presentation, are you
Mhm.
referring to under 2,000 students? Or is there another qualifier that you're using?
So small schools, in this case, it's districts either schools or districts that have under certain enrollment levels. I think it's like under 70 total enrollment get small school funding. So like Shaw Island, which has 10 students, 10 students when you run it through the prototypical school model will generate next to nothing. So the legislature said, okay, we're going to give you, I'm just pulling a number out, we're going to give you 3 teachers instead of what the prototypical school would fund, which is probably like a half teacher. So uh, it's the super teeny tiny districts that generate it. And then if you have a remote and necessary school, like Cascade School District, there's one I think it's called Holden Village. That's way up in the mountains. It's a resort town. They get remote and necessary funding because they have to have a school there, so you have to serve those students somehow. So they get an additional allocation for that school.
Great, thank you. A couple other questions. Do you know off the top of your head what the legislature is currently giving us for inflation?
I believe it's the IPD, the same as all the other inflationary measures.
And
So
is that at like 3.2? Is that what that is right now? Roz, do you
mhm,
know? Not off the top of your head.
I don't off the top of my head, sorry.
yeah. So it's obviously a number that isn't keeping up with the actual costs.
That's the more important part. It's 3 point something and that's too low. Okay. Fair enough. And then do you know or could you access what districts actually spend on technology per student?
I can access that, and I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I will put it in the chat after I pull some data for y'all.
Great, thank you so much. So maybe big picture, Daniel, I'm just curious because there was a lot of detail budget numbers in your presentation. So for the budget numbers nerds, that'll be really helpful. But from a big picture perspective, if you're thinking about the places in K-12 where there are shortfalls in state funding from actual district spending. Is MSOC among one of the categories that's towards the top in terms of we need more in order to keep up? And if so, what does it contend with? Do you have a sense for some of the other areas where we're not getting the state funding at pace with what districts are having to spend?
Yeah, I would say MSOCs are really up there towards the top. Because you have to keep the lights on, you have to keep your buildings insured, and like insurance costs are going up. We're hearing 20-30%, increase in insurance, and the state's only providing a 3% bump, you know, then obviously, that's just going to keep outpacing it. But also when you look at, areas where districts cut back, um, they'll cut back on classroom budgets, they'll cut back on curriculum adoptions, just because they need money for all these other things. And so some of the areas where sometimes you can come back, it's okay, we're not going to do a curriculum adoption this year. We'll push it off one more year. Or, we're going to cut back on the amount that we spend on paper or things like that.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, there's only so much money to go around. And as you increase the cost in one area, you got to decrease them in another area.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for that. Appreciate that. Yeah, Darcy Huffman from the Olympia School District put in the chat that they were 4 million short with just MSOC last year alone. So those are big numbers. So thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate that. Very good context setting, not just in preparation for General Assembly, but also as you consider what your priorities will be for WSSDA in identifying what our legislative priorities are for next session. This could be one of them, as it is a legislative position, so you could prioritize this high. Thanks for your insight, Daniel. And if you wouldn't mind putting in that technology per student there in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and turn our attention to Roz and one of our favorite topics, unfunded mandates. Lucky you for getting
Yikes. Yeah.
deliver
Wow.
some more concrete lists of what they are and why we should be more mad than we already are.
I know we really should, but we're very nice in education. We care about a lot of things. So, Marissa, thank you so much for inviting me. Good afternoon, everybody. Really honored to be here. You all have important work ahead of you this month, and we all do as we get started in a new school year. So, I'm going to share with you, I feel like maybe it's kind of a little bit of a history lesson. I don't know. Because it certainly was for me as I kind of revisited this document that Marissa and I and others have talked about for the last few years, as I kind of developed this whole little presentation for you today. When I first got to AWSP about 7 years ago, I was a former high school teacher, librarian. I have my principal cert. I worked as a district administrator, came here about 7 years ago and really, had to get up to speed with lots of statewide policy. And it was in the year 2018 that our state was undergoing the staffing enrichments work group, where we were looking at the prototypical funding model around staffing units. It's inadequate for what our students need. And there was this whole process, a year-long process. Some of you are probably involved in that, to create some recommendations. That was 2019. And then, of course, we all know what happened 2020 and beyond. And we did address some of that by getting some new, school counselors and nurses and things like that addressed. But as that committee work was happening, I developed, as I was learning my role, a list of policies that for principals, because that's my audience here, all the things that are on a principal's plate that they are tasked with doing. And before I show you that list, and Marissa's given you that list, and I really do actually need to update that list because, it's now not just 10 years of policy, but it's really more like 15 years of policy. One of the ways I organized it, which I wanted to share with you first, was in the 3 big buckets of work that we talk about principals needing to lead. So school leadership, we say principals are lead learners managing a learning organization. So they're there to set the conditions so that everyone, each and every student and staff members can be learning to the best of their ability. All the conditions are set so that they are doing the very best they can. And what it requires is principals to lead in 3 domains: the culture of the school, the systems of the school, and then learning. And what really has changed, and you've all been around education for a long time, especially in the last 10 or 15 years, is that, you know, we've had this huge increase and focus for building leadership on instruction and instructional leadership. So I set out to write this document. So these are just some screenshots of that document that I kept kind of adding. Oh, this bill passed. And this was, you know, this added to the workload of a building principal who's leading the culture, systems, and learning. And as we were making, you know, having this discussion around the staffing enrichments work group, one of the areas in which we made recommendations is changing in the prototypical school model the ratio and adding more assistant principals in particular, because assistant principals can help manage those systems, work with more directly with students, and help so that there's more instructional leadership and focus on instruction. So this was kind of how I set out to make that. So in showing you this document, what I thought I would do is show you here's examples of what's happened in our state in the last 10 or 15 years. Good policy has been passed. Some policy, you know, we don't love. And has there been attention paid to funding it or not, or underfunding it, right? Maybe there was an attempt to give some initial funding to it or not. But as Marissa and Mike and others and I look at the hundreds of bills that are introduced every year, we're paying more attention to, gosh, is there funding that comes maybe with this very good policy or not? And if not, what does that do to the people in the buildings, the people closest to students, paraeducators, teachers, principals, et cetera? And all of you setting budgets, if you're not giving adequate funding to make this work happen. So in the section of culture, here's a couple things. You know, revised discipline policies is a really big emphasis right now. But in 2016, the Bill 1541 was passed that asked the state to revise that. Those went into place in 2019. And really no funding was given for professional development for how to enact a very drastically different change in discipline policies. And that doesn't even have what to do with what we've done this summer to kind of go back and review some of those things. So again, very underfunded and very important work that has to happen around the culture of a school building. Lots of other examples, equitable outcomes. There has been some funding, of course, given to additional professional development and things like that. But this is the work that's happening that has to happen, the urgency with which we have to address this. In the systems category, here's the beginning of a list. You'll see on there drills, attendance, behavioral mental health screenings. These have been added over the years, MTSS, PBIS. I think I circled a couple. MTSS, very important. I don't think specific money has been given to that, but of course districts can use some PD dollars and things like that to make that happen. I circled the menstrual products bill. Great concept of making sure that this is not an issue for students at school, but that did not come with any funding. So as we talk about that bill, you know, good intent, but no funding. We have to weigh that. Same with the school counseling bill. Great bill that really focuses good work on what school counselors can be focused on, but no funding came with that. So these are just a few examples. In the learning domain, you know, this is the massive list. If you look at the actual document that I did send to Marissa, so much has been added in the last 10 or 15 years with this. New standards in all areas. And now we are to the point where we're revising learning standards. Assessments have changed. Huge, huge one is graduation requirements. You know this, every time we have a bill about graduation requirements, that really does add to the workload of your building counselors, teachers, principals, etc. We've added changes to high school beyond plan, graduation pathways, etc. There was money given when the TPEP system came in. So there was some funding there, which is great. FAFSA Day, again, an example where there was no funding given to it, but schools were asked to hold a mandatory, day or evening or something to teach students about FAFSA. So a little hit and miss there. I think I even got tired of circling so many things on the learning domain list that I had. But you can see just kind of as we've gone through the years, and again, I need to update this, so many great things come and are a part of our school system. We want to respond to the needs of students, and it adds to the work, as you know, of our adults. I put it in a visual too as well. I just added this morning thinking this is helpful to see that here's a principal. We use an hourglass metaphor to talk about all the different things, policy levels coming their way, and having to really, how do I, manage my time so that all of those things happen. And on the other end, if you'd flipped up the hourglass on the other side, there's all these concerns that they're responding to from their community. So really being intentional about pausing on policy and making sure that as we, are hit with new policy or mandates, have we really addressed the nature of how they're funded or how they're supported, and have we removed things from our plate? So that's become more of our conversation. Again, as Marissa and I navigate some of the bills and conversations we have with our legislators. And it's just for all of you to kind of consider this. Couple more pieces of information, just really making people aware of it. This kind of list of, wow, we've added all of these things is helpful to just teach people about that with legislators and policymakers. The Senate, Senator Wellman is having her Senate staff review RCWs, looking for efficiencies and looking for, wow, look at all these additions we've made to policy, and we really have not funded certain things like having a homeless engagement, point person in a district, having a foster liaison. Some of these things they're looking at and they're kind of making a list, and I haven't seen their kind of final summer report on that, but I know they're doing that. The other thing that we're doing is looking at the WACs, because my last word here is just de-implementation. Some of it we do to ourselves, I think, in the education system. We do things a certain way, and we don't need to. We can stop doing some things. For example, with TPEP, we're looking at, with this TPEP steering committee, what are a few changes we might make in the evaluation process that would be good for the system and that would make TPEP meaningful and manageable. So I think the idea, there's a book out there, I think Peter DeWitt is one of the authors, on de-implementing things if they don't have a good return on investment or make sense. And I think that's one thing we can collectively do as a system to address them. But I thought I'd just share all that with you for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
The only question that we got in the chat, thank you, Roz. I really appreciate you going through that in detail and giving some context for how our instructional leaders are more specifically impacted at the building level. That is certainly a lens our school directors are considering and should continue to consider. So thank you for that perspective. I think it's more of a rhetorical question, but curious if you have heard about districts who might be considering suing the state about the unfunded or underfunded. Any word on the street from your perspective with your principals or school buildings about that particular?
I have not heard that. And, principals are very, they are there to support their district, and their building and their students. So I think they wouldn't be the ones probably leading that work, but I think they would, if that's an action that a district's going to take, they would step in to support, because they truly, as they manage their buildings, staffing and student behavior and mental health, they really are not leading instructionally like we think they should be or want them to be. And so as a system to tell that story or to have different examples of this, because there's fantastic things happening in our schools every day, but how can we get better? How could we make it great? Those are the kinds of stories that I hear, not so much the, direct action of, oh, because of this, we're going to take actions to sue or do something like that. So I have not heard that.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective.
Mhm.
And for those of you that aren't already aware, Roz and I work extraordinarily close together during the legislative session year round, but particularly during the legislative session. We meet with our educational partners multiple times per week, actually, during a ledge session to say, all right, we've got this bill. This is how it impacts our members or our clients. Sometimes we're collectively as a education group in alignment with our concerns and also the areas where we want to champion. And then sometimes we have differences in opinion about our approach and recognize that's part of the work that we do. So I'm just curious from your perspective, Roz, because you have been an awesome champion around this pause on policy.
Yeah.
Mantra, which we would ascribe to as well.
I love it when I can kill a bill. Just be like, nope, done. A great idea, but nope. Yep.
And all of you shouldn't be surprised to know that that's some of the work that we do as an advocacy group is change bills so that they're better for implementation purposes, better funded, have better timelines that are more feasible. But there are a lot of bills that never see the light of day because we get to them first. So how, given that legislators want to pass bills, how do we grapple with this idea that they want to pass bills, but they need to be funded and there are limited dollars? Do we just say no to all of them? Like, how have you, as AWSP, balanced good policy with under or unfunded policy considerations? That's a
Yeah.
big question, but just
Yeah, it is. And it's hard. I mean, I see Dave Larson's question now too. And it's interesting. It kind of also goes to special education. I mean, has been talk around the next McCleary 2.0 of, well, the next lawsuit should be around the shortage of special education funding. Well, the next one could be about unfunded mandates, right? Or, fill in the blank. So I get your earlier question. And then I just see Judy's really quick to center Woven work with reps. I'm not sure if she's done that yet, Judy, but I know she's having her staff comb through RCWs looking for efficiencies. And then in your response to your question, Marissa, I mean, even talking to it was Rep Skylar Root in the Walla Walla area, for example, I'll say to him things like, Skylar, our Representative Root, our principals can't, and you can't get to everything they're expected to get to, right? And give numerous examples of, here's what we want them to be doing, and here's what's in their way. And he wants examples because there's interest not only in just passing a bill for the sake of passing a bill, but for fixing it and saying, gosh, let's pass a bill that gets rid of some of these things that are cumbersome. And so if you kind of turn it into that conversation, times have changed. Gosh, 10, 15 years later, our society's a lot different. Let's look at things differently. It's still going to require a bill. And you can say to your constituents, I've passed a bill. It just may undo or change or modify something rather than be additive. And I hope, Judy, that she does come back to school districts when she gets the information. I think her staff's still finishing that work, but
great.
So,
Thank
yeah.
you, Roz.
Yes.
I appreciate it. It's a big issue. And we continue to try to inform our legislators about the implications, but we need all of your help in doing that too.
Yes.
Can't do it on our own. So
Yes.
we only have a couple minutes left, and I want to give some time to Larry Garcia to answer just briefly some questions about impact aid and taro tax. There were some amendments that came through the amendment window that do have some rationale. Please, everybody, as you're considering how you're going to weigh in on proposals during General Assembly, please read the rationale statements. However, sometimes there's just additional detail that might be helpful. So Larry, would you mind just sharing with us what is impact aid and what is taro tax?
Impact aid is a federal money that is given to school districts on federal lands, whether they be Indian lands, military, federal lands of any kind, because there's no tax base. When you have no tax base, you have no way of generating money to build a school district or build a new school. And there are 44 schools in the state of Washington that receive impact aid money, whether it be military or Indian land schools. Washington State generates almost $88 million in impact aid money. If we were fully funded, which is the program has not been fully funded since 1969, we would receive $134 million. Our program, impact aid program in 2023 received $1.6 billion in federal monies nationwide. This last year, we received only $1.4 billion. So we lost $200 million in impact aid last year, basically because Congress did not give us the money we were asking, to keep us basically level funded. And it's a hard fight. We fight every year to go up to Washington, D.C. and ask them, to keep the funding up there. But it's falling on deaf ears, and I'm getting scared of that because that's 25% of my budget. If I lose that money, I have to get rid of teachers and do away with sports and other stuff.
Sure.
I'll stop on that because it's a very complicated program. Taro tax, Yakama Nation has the Taro tax. Tulalip tribe has the Taro tax. Puyallup also. Loomis Nation has it. Colville has it. And the Spokane tribe and Smohomish tribe have a Taro tax. It is a tax that the tribe is able to put upon you whenever you do any kind of construction on the tribe. You're required to pay a tax. When we built our new grade school here 3 years ago, we paid $800 million in the Taro tax to the Yakama Nation. And then the tax varies from tribe to tribe. So I know in the Yakama Nation, I believe it was 3% that we paid them. But yeah, you have to be careful with that when you are building because of that tax. And a lot of times, there could be other tribes out there that have a Taro tax, but those are the only ones we were able to find in the state of Washington. So,
Larry, can you tell me what TARO stands for? That is an
TARO
acronym.
stands for, hang on here, I got it. Tribal Employment Rights Ordinance is what it stands for. So it's Tribal Employment Rights Ordinance that they put on. Some of the tribes, I think, call it something different, but it's a tax that the nation can put upon you. So
Great. And if folks have, if anyone here or any other school board member have questions about impact aid or TARO tax, are you comfortable with them reaching out to you directly?
Oh yeah, no problem at all.
That's excellent. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. I know that wasn't very much time
No,
to
that's fine.
just give an
It's a very complicated system.
Very
It is.
complicated system.
Yeah, because we're going up to DC here next week.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. I appreciate you all staying a little bit later than we had scheduled. This was a very robust agenda. There's certainly even more to talk about than we were able to cover today, but hopefully got you thinking about some of the details and reasons why you might want to support or oppose different proposals that are coming forward to General Assembly this year. And also, hopefully you learned a little bit about what you might say as the voting delegate when giving your pro or con statements in response to those proposals coming forward at General Assembly. So thank you so much for being here. Hope to see you all again on Thursday. We will be talking about the learning and staffing categories specifically. Hopefully one of the most important things that we work on is student outcomes. So and staff experiences. So thanks again to our presenters and for all of you for taking the time. Talk to you soon. Bye.